Serious answers only. What disturbing thing did you learn about someone only after their death? Not really disturbing, but I found a restraining order against my mom banning her from entering our local grocery store. I will never know that story. I have a funny grocery store banning story you can hear. When a buddy of mine was in high school, they started putting self-checkout machines at the Stop and Shop. He discovered that he could just walk in, grab 230 racks of beers, and walk out the self-checkout and no one would ever notice. He became the beer hookup for his underage friends and would do his foolproof plan every weekend. Then one weekend at a party in the next town over with a bunch of groups of kids from the next town's school, from across the yard another kid he'd never met before goes, "Oh my God, I tease you." The kid worked at Stop and Shop, and in the back room of the Stop and Shops, even in the surrounding towns he had not visited, there were posters of him essentially branding him Stop and Shop enemy number one. The kid said, "Dude, people are looking for you. Like a lot of people." He stopped going to Stop and Shop ever again and had to make up excuses or drive far away to a different chain of store in a different town if his mum asked him to get something. My great-grandfather had a whole other wife with 7 children he told no one about. This is incredibly common. Can't believe the amount of people who got away with this until after they died. I guess back in there was no internet and people tended to stay and settle in their hometown, so odds they bump into one another were slim. Still, I imagine I'd call my kids other kids' names accidentally on occasion. Yep, it's coming out more and more with 23andMe and Ancestry. My dad was adopted. We always assumed his birth mother was a teenager in trouble. But she was actually a 35-year-old married woman, whose husband was away at war, and she got pregnant to a visiting serviceman. So I've popped up on these websites as a cousin, second cousin, etc., and part of this huge Catholic family in the South Island of New Zealand. She's long dead, so they can't ask her questions, but I'm sure I was an interesting topic of conversation at Christmas. Finding out your mum had a son and his daughter is contacting you. That my aunt that was stealing from my grandmother. The aunt was withdrawing money of my grandmother's bank account even after she died. The aunt said my grandmother had a gambling problem, but there was no way my grandmother could leave her house by herself. That was why my aunt had access to her bank account. Means I don't have to see my aunt again, which I am happy about. I received a phone call from my late husband's girlfriend the day of his funeral. She was phoning his cell phone, which I had turned off while he was in the hospital. She told me that my husband had been paying her rent for the last year. The bank had recently foreclosed on our house. I had no idea he was unfaithful to me, but she knew all about me. Something similar happened to my mom. My dad had this mistress for whom he paid all the bills, including even her college bills. She was probably like 30 or 35. And he was 44 when he died. The college thing really hurt my mom, as she always wanted to go herself, but there was never money. Anyways, the woman had the nerve to show at his funeral. She didn't stay but went by the casket to say goodbye. Really shitty. My mom found out about their relationship before his passing, but he had tried to make amends, told her he and the woman were done for, etc., and my mom stayed busy of her 3 kids. My dad would often threaten to kill me and my siblings, my mom and then himself if she left. We caught him cheating long before that as well. Lots of stories. My mom went through hell with that mofo. I don't really miss him at all, and am glad I didn't get to grow into an adult having him in my life. Although given all his shit I matured a lot earlier than kids do. I was 11 when he died. Anyway, my mom endured a lot BC of him. I do not know how I could possibly go through what she did. She's a true hero. Apparently this story is not uncommon. Brother-in-law's best friend rang him distraught after going through his recently deceased, much older sister's papers. He had discovered that she wasn't his sister as he had thought for the last 70 years, she was his mother. Usual story, teenage pregnancy, went to a convent to have the baby, gave it to mum to bring up. He apparently had a good relationship with her, and he was upset because she couldn't tell him the truth. Honestly, I think that arrangement is more civilized than having to abandon your baby to an orphanage or to strangers, if you really wanted to keep it but your family wouldn't allow it. You still get to see them grow up and have a close relationship with them, and you aren't having to raise a baby while still in school, etc. Obviously the relationship with the parents would be strained, and depending how they feel about it might hold a grudge about having to raise a child that isn't theirs, but I don't imagine a non-supportive family would even suggest keeping the baby in the family anyway. Considering how many horror stories there are from the relatively recent past of young women being forcibly sent away to convents to conceal the pregnancy, give birth, and have their baby taken away for the sake of family reputation, this arrangement doesn't seem too bad. I once had a friend whose dad died. And he never really talked about it, but he was pretty troubled. Every year on his death date, they would have a celebration of life party. He invited our friend group one year and we were all excited to be there to support him. Turns out his dad died in a car accident involving a drunk driver. The dad was the drunk driver and also killed the family he hit. We kinda brought it up to him to see how he really felt about everything, and he defended his dad. I understand that's a hard situation because you lost your dad. But your dad also killed a whole family. I'm not friends with him anymore. For a different reason. But that helped in my decision to break our friendship. He was very troubled. That weekend we were with him for the celebration, he ended up sexually assaulting my best friend. But no one but me and her know about it. Obviously she isn't friends with him either. After my grandfather's death we were cleaning out his old house and I found an envelope with paperwork that basically said my dad had died by suicide. I had been told as a kid that it was a heart attack. It was a shitty way to find out the truth. My buddy's mom totally killed my buddy's dad. She had taken a $200,000 life insurance policy out on him 6 months before he died, and he died from not taking his medication that he'd taken no problem all of his life. My buddy was away for the weekend so wasn't home when his dad died. After his mom died, we found out she'd taken a life insurance policy out on my buddy at some point too. And she'd also forged his signature to sign over $100,000 my buddy's dad had left to him. She also faked illnesses to get prescription drugs and had little books filled with info on what she'd sold and how much she'd made from selling them. My brother-in-law died in an accident, and his wife found out by going through his phone that he was sleeping with several other women, many of whom were pretty close in our friend group and some were also married. It was quite awkward and got pretty messy. My grandpa had a son he never told us about too, and my grandma's current fear is that one day he'll come looking for my grandpa and she'll have to tell him that he died over 10 years ago. This just happened with my father. Did a gene test and was contacted by a sister I didn't know I had on my dad's side. She had been looking her whole life. Her mom gave her a list of possible names, but my dad went by a nickname. Had to let her know he passed a decade ago. Was tough. One of my best friends died suddenly and clearly didn't have a chance to clean up his affairs beforehand. He had little family, so the group of friends handled everything. We found child porn in his house. Not just a few pieces or somehow accidental. It was in a file cabinet with folders and sorted by ages, sex, etc. Changed everything. That's simply not acceptable. Not acceptable sounds like an understatement, but it was actually the other way. It was just nope. No excuses, no trying to understand, no worries about his family or their reputations or his or anything, no anything. It was instantly done and over, and he was labeled with the scarlet letter. We called the police in a matter of seconds. I literally puked that night over it. If you like the content, please consider subscribing, and don't forget to hit the like button.